You need more help than you think you do for longer than you think you need it. Possibly that's true of all mothers, but particularly of single moms. And you probably are going to need it from a wider range of people than somebody who is partnered. And so, what that means is that you're going to need to very carefully consider who you have in your life, but you need people in your life. And for the most part, it's actually better to have imperfect people than to have fewer perfect people. So maybe someone doesn't have the exact same parenting style as you, or it's not the exact same facility that you would prefer, but that doesn't mean it's not a beautiful thing to have that person in your life.
Hi, guys, and welcome to the House Call Vet Cafe podcast. I'm Dr. Eve Harrison. I'm a full-time integrative concierge house call veterinarian in Los Angeles, and I help other vets to build their unique mobile practices on their terms. This podcast is for and by house call and mobile veterinarians, so it is meant to give our community a platform to connect, to share our stories, to lift each other up, and to support each other. Most of us work solo as lone wolves, right? So for me, it's been really powerful to be able to physically hear the voices of my colleagues from all over the world and to get a chance to feel that we truly are part of a community of very real other human beings who get it. While you may be alone in that little bubble of your own vehicle when you're on the road seeing patients, I welcome you to join our community by tuning into our own podcast when you're on your way to your next house call. Whether you're a super experienced house call vet with 30 years of experience, you're a brand new prospective house call vet just looking to get started, or you're house call curious, there will be something for you in this podcast. Each episode, you will hear interviews from other mobile veterinarians just like yourself who are doing unique and innovative things, vets who are sharing their stories, their struggles and challenges, and you can also look forward to hearing valuable information and perspectives from specialists and experts outside of our micro niche. And finally, if becoming a house call veterinarian is something that you've been thinking about exploring, or you're looking for some extra support getting your own mobile practice to feel more profitable and sustainable for you, check out the information in the show notes about my course and our above and beyond supportive private community for members only, plus our monthly group coaching sessions within the House Call Vet Academy. You can also check out my free public Facebook group, which is also called the House Call Vet Cafe, the same name as this podcast, and which is a warm and cozy community for mobile vets to support each other in professional and personal development, in creative entrepreneurship, and in friendship. So thank you guys for spending time with me today. Let's dive into the episode.
Welcome back to part 3 of our 3-part series with Dr. Emily Yunker. I think maybe this last segment was one of my favorite parts of our conversation, and I hope you guys absolutely love it as much as I do. And without further ado, here is episode 3.
Hey everyone, we have an amazing guest today that I've been really excited about speaking with for a while, and I think you guys will be really excited to hear this episode too. Who do we have with us? We have the amazing Dr. Emily Yunker, DVM, CVMRT, CVH Doula, who is a vet and a mom and a whole lot more. She works full-time in rehabilitation and integrative medicine, while still sometimes working in ER medicine. She's also the veterinarian doula, a role that has her working with moms who are vets everywhere from fertility and conception planning through those first rough weeks back at work, and especially in the weeks immediately before and after birth. The connecting strand in everything she does is holistic wellness, consideration for the whole being within the context of their environment and their relationships. It works for professionals, families, animals, workplaces, politics, and everything. Welcome, Emily. You're a phenomenal human being, and we've been following each other for a while, and I'm just so excited that we're finally having this conversation, and I wanted to welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Eve. I'm so excited to be here.
Moving a little bit more into that decision processes for moms and prospective mom. I'm just saying mom just out of habit, but there's parents of all genders and things like that. So I want to say I see you too, despite my language up until this point. I wanted to see, is there any advice that you have for new or prospective parents who might be on the house call or entrepreneurial path? And I'm open to your personal experiences, advice, Or, I know that we had talked quite a bit about our lovely friend, Dr. Emily Singler, and she's got a bunch of resources too. So if you'd like to share some of hers, like she's lovely, also like in a bit of a fan club with you over her. So if you want to share anything of hers.
Yes. Yeah, I will start with Dr. Singler's work. So Emily Singler is a VMD because, they have to be fancy over there. Yeah. And she is a mom of four. Her oldest is graduating from high school and her youngest is still in preschool. So she has kind of run the spectrum. And she decided about the same time I decided to start doing veterinarian doula, she decided to write a book. And she now has written a book, and it is, I'm going to butcher the title, something like Pregnancy and Postpartum Considerations for Veterinary Team. There we go. There we go.
You got it. You got it.
I got it.
Wait, can I interrupt you really quick to show
Yeah.
you my signed copy? I met her in person at VMX and I got a signed copy of the book. It made me so happy. Okay, as you were.
Yes. And so Emily basically put everything in writing that she wished she had known with her first. And it is actually published by a textbook company, which is cool because the first half of it is kind of like reading OSHA for the pregnant veterinarian or the pregnant veterinary professional. And I mean, she really like breaks it down into like the research on various topics like infectious disease and radiation therapy and anesthesia gases and vaccine risks. Do you accidentally poke yourself? And I mean, all the things that like have occurred to people that frankly your MD, your obstetrician, your midwife does not know. They're not great about specific risks to veterinarians. And so I very clearly remember just Googling stuff when I was pregnant the first time and getting real sketch answers that were like, we think the risk is low. The end. And you're like, that does not make me feel better. And basically, we were all just winging it. And so she wrote it all down and actually did the research for us. And it's really great. And then the second half of the book, which I would actually say, even though people don't Google it as much, is more valuable, is about basically the lived experience of being a veterinary professional and a parent. And so she talks about infertility. She talks about pregnancy loss. She talks about postpartum. She talks about mental health disorders. She talks about daycare, how to pick a daycare. She talks about finances. She talks about, gosh, I mean, like how many children you have, the perceptions of your coworkers, how to navigate telling your boss, like all these things that are sort of just universally part of the experience. And she put them in a book. And I think it's great. And I personally, and I'll tell you what I think should happen here. If you are not a solo practitioner, if you are in a multi-person practice, so there's staff and doctors, and maybe even just one doctor and some staff, you should have this on the shelf in the building in an easily accessible place. And I say that because I want anyone in the practice to feel like they can go and get a resource before they're ready to tell HR. So if they're considering pursuing infertility treatment, they can reach for this book before they're ready to tell their plans to anybody. If they have a miscarriage, they can reach for this book and not have to talk to anybody. If they're really early in their pregnancy and they're not ready to talk about it, but they need to know how to be safe at work, they can reach for this. And that is why I don't think it should be hidden away in the practice manager's office. I think it needs to be easily accessible to the staff at any time. So that is definitely my top resource.
I will get behind you on that hill or like that. What do you call it?
Soapbox.
Soapbox. I'll get with you on that soapbox. Like to everyone who sees this on YouTube, this is the book. Like, where the hell has this been all of our lives? Like, where have you been, Emily Yunker, all of our lives? And Emily Singler. I mean, you've been where you are doing exactly what you're meant to be doing, but now we know about you. And like, I'm going to put the link to the book in here and also offerings from Emily as well. Like, just so that you guys can reach out. Because I'm just dumbfounded that our profession, which is so heavily female, and these issues are day in and day out, like that we don't talk about this in the mainstream, that it's like you have to go to a really niche special veterinary doula. Like, I'm glad you exist and what a special work you do. And the same for me. Like, it's not the same level of stuff, but like there now is a special niche person who talks about house call practice But we should have learned how to do business in school. We should have learned how to like live and be okay and embrace the wholeness of ourselves and our bodies and the functionality of what our bodies are supposed to do when we're not completely damaged by the work itself, right? So like, yeah, back to you, but like thank you. I'm on that soapbox with you. That's what I wanted to say.
All right. Other resources and other just sort of tips and words. Okay. So I will say, I think lifestyle medicine is pretty key in case that hasn't come across yet. And I don't want to rag on people for not being perfect enough because that is a tendency in veterinarians. But I think that sometimes we get into this space where we feel like we can't control things. And so we just sort of let go and stop trying. And that does not actually help. That actually leads to sort of a self confirmation of feeling powerless and out of control and at the whim of whatever it is we're afraid of. And so I would instead encourage people to take small, actionable steps on things that they can do. And it doesn't mean that you're controlling the situation, but it does mean that you're understanding, there's like the classic things you can't control, things you can control, and recognizing which things you can control and which things you can't. Perfectionism is trying to control things that you can't. But the inverse of that, I'm not sure what the name for that is, but the inverse of that is not understanding that you actually do have control of your life in a lot of
Kind of
ways.
like a learned helplessness is kind of
Yeah,
how I
here
see
we
it.
go. Yeah, like a learned helplessness. And interestingly, you could have both at the same time. And in fact, perfectionism tends to lead to learned helplessness because if you can't do it perfectly fine, then you're not going to do it at all. And so you have to instead define things you cannot control and things you can control and lean into the things that you can control. And so for me, when I'm talking to someone who's pregnant, I want you to really be as into your diet as you can. I want you to be moving your body in healthy ways. I want you to be actively working on your mental health and actively working on your relationships. And literally, this improves your pregnancy outcomes. But at the same time, we are not outcomes based because you cannot control all of your pregnancy outcomes. And so you lean into the things you can control and let go of the things you cannot control. And that works for pregnancy, it works for birth. And I'll tell you, here's the thing, it works for parenting because you can't control your kid. You think you can control your kid. You're wrong. They're their own human. They have their own course. And the more you understand before that kid is even out of the womb, that your job is not to control the child, your job is to facilitate their well being. And so, like, control the things you can control and let go of the things you can't control. And sometimes it takes a lot of education to understand the difference, right? And so I spend a lot of time just doing that. I spend a lot of time talking to moms about their specific circumstances. And in this specific circumstance, which pieces of this are yours to hold and which pieces of this are not yours to hold? And how do we build a team so that they can hold the pieces you can't hold? And I mean, in a nutshell, that's what I do. So I tend to work with moms who either have specific things that they want, and they're like, how do I get that thing I want? And I will absolutely help them understand what they can control in that situation. But at the same time, we're literally just talking the whole time about what you can't control. Because I'm like, okay, this one likes control. So we're going to have to teach her to back up a little bit. And then the inverse, people who have something like a really complex medical diagnosis with their pregnancy and they're trying to navigate the medical system, and the medical system is not good about helping you understand things you can control. They like their diagnostics, they like their pathologies, and they like their medical interventions. They're not good at all the lifestyle stuff. They're not good about reminding you to stay connected to yourself and your partner throughout this process. They're not good about helping you bond with your baby in utero. This is not what their world is. They don't do that. So that's what I do. I help people understand the pieces they can control and to help them set up their team, their maternal fetal medicine specialist or their fertility specialist or their doula or their partner or their postpartum support. Who do you need to set up to help you handle those pieces? And so those are sort of the two groups I work with, people who have really specific outcomes and they want to know how to get it, or people who things are really complicated and kind of a mess and I help them figure out how to navigate it. And so I think you need to find those people, find the people in your life that can help you navigate it, whatever it is, and really work on the pieces you can work on. I feel like that's like motherhood in a nutshell. Maybe it's life. Maybe it's life in a nutshell.
I mean, I think that's universally good advice. Like overall, I'm like, oh yeah, taking notes. They're like, this- that's beautiful. Like I really love that, and I think differentiating between the things you can control and the things you can't control, and taking agency just keeps coming up. Agency, and like that's so much a part of the paradigm in which I work to help people create their own practices, a lifestyle practice, basically. It's to find your agency so that you can be who you are and be who you want to be and provide the support for the well being of the children that you want to have. And so I think that it's like can't be said enough times how important that differentiation and acknowledgement of where there is agency and where there isn't, and just acknowledging what is what so that you can make decisions around that and have the life that you want.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Lau. I'm the founder of O3 Vets. One of the challenges of being a mobile veterinarian is that you have a more limited toolbox to draw from. At O3 Vets, we put a powerful tool into your toolbox by providing ozone therapy equipment designed specifically to help the mobile veterinarian treat those tough cases. Ozone works as a redox molecule to help decrease inflammation and improve cellular communication. This has an incredibly beneficial effect on a variety of conditions, as demonstrated through the hundreds of scientific studies available. If you would like to join thousands of veterinarians who've experienced the power of ozone therapy, you can visit o3vets.com or call us at 517-925-8148. If you mention this ad, you'll get access to our online training course with the purchase of your ozone equipment.
And so, one other question before we start to close up the conversation. Single mothers out there have a unique situation. It's a uniquely challenging and emotional path that they're on, especially veterinarians who are single moms. I would love to hear any kind of thoughts or advice or well wishes for single moms in the veterinary space. Any thoughts that you have, and anything that you'd like to share specifically for the single moms out there.
Yeah, as we said when I came on, actually, my first client was a single by choice mom. And of course, not everybody is single by choice, but that is a really interesting path to trod. And so this depends a little bit about kind of where you are on that journey. If you're considering intentionally being a single mother, like this person was, then I would say that you probably already know this, but you need more help than you think you do for longer than you think you need it. Possibly that's true of all mothers, but particularly of single moms. And you probably are going to need it from a wider range of people than somebody who is partnered. And so, what that means is that you're going to need to very carefully consider who you have in your life, but you need people in your life. And for the most part, it's actually better to have imperfect people than to have fewer perfect people. So maybe someone doesn't have the exact same parenting style as you, or it's not the exact same facility that you would prefer, but that doesn't mean it's not a beautiful thing to have that person in your life. And you're going to need help on multiple fronts. So yeah, everyone's like, yeah, you need to have childcare. Yes, yes, you do need to have childcare. That's like only one thing. You also need help with taking care of your home, feeding yourself. Initially, during pregnancy and postpartum, you need help with your body care, especially postpartum, but I mean that's absolutely true during pregnancy as well. There are actually some increased risk factors for unpartnered women through pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And now, admittedly, some of those are skewed by the statistics on women who have like unplanned pregnancies and who are unpartnered and unsupported. And probably a lot of that can be mitigated by having people in your life who are fulfilling those support roles. But it does mean you need to actively be working. So personally, I think every single person who is walking into birth unpartnered needs to have a doula. And you also need to have a postpartum doula. That's my personal opinion. I mean, I also think everybody should have a doula. So there's that. But in particular, so that's the specific time period of birth and postpartum. And I will say, I think you need help not just in the first 2 weeks, like, and not even in the first 6 weeks. You need to freaking plan on like an au pair for like the next year. And yes, not everybody has the resources for that. So then you have to get more creative. Are you going to move in with your parents? That's a real possibility and should seriously be considered. And in fact, most of the single people I know with children have moved in with their parents while their children are very young. And we need to remove the stigma on that, as far as I'm concerned. Or you get really lucky and form a commune of other like-minded women who all share childcare duties together. Let me know if you find that one. Or I have a lovely veterinarian friend who graduated the year after me from Auburn. He moved in with his sister when she had her baby, and they are co-parenting her baby. And he is the uncle, which is such an incredible gift. And he is such a wonderful human being. And so, like, you need to get creative about who else is going to be in your life to help you because you need help. I say to parents all the time, and this is not easy to hear. So trying to be as gentle as I can, I say all the time, infants are not meant to be raised by two parents in a nuclear household, especially newborns. They're actually meant to be in physical contact with a human all the time and to never be put down. That's their biological norm. And so if people are going to be productive members of society and get sleep and take care of a newborn, you actually need a minimum of 3 people to pull that off. And we're all trying to do it with 2 and struggling. And now you're asking yourself to do it with no one, just you. And that is actually a recipe for harm. And unfortunately, we've seen that in the news. Even Olympic athletes are not immune to major postpartum problems when they are left alone with newborns. And then, unfortunately, my first client, even though we did the best we could to set her up for success, she had a major hypertensive crisis in her postpartum and ended up in the hospital for days. And she had set herself up. Her mother was living with her. Her brother was in town. She had care for her newborn and her dogs, and she was okay. But the point is, you have to put those plans in place. And then now we're past the postpartum phase. We're into the rest of your child's life. The whole point of being a parent, the parenting part of it. And that's remembering that we are not meant to do this alone. And we're not really also meant to do this in nuclear families. And so we just need to expand our horizons and remember who we can include in our child's life. And I love it if we can include multi-generational options, but we can also include peer support. And then, of course, we have our paid support and we have our, what resources do you have in your community? So our schools are really what we have in the US. And all of those people are incredibly valuable to your child. And they're all there for you, but you have to consciously create that since it's not just going to happen as the cultural norm. Now, as a working veterinarian, Emily Singler was single for a time with her younger children after her divorce. And here I'm just telling her story, and I feel like that's so awkward. But
From her soon enough, I'm sure.
she'll tell it again. And she really did. She really struggled with some really inflexible workplaces who did not understand the challenge of getting out on time to pick up kids from daycares that closed at the same time that the hospital did, and the need to end up having to hire someone to pick up your kids from work because you couldn't get out of work on time, and how she was judged by her coworkers for being lazy and not wanting to finish her work. When in reality, there was just no option. There was no one else to do this. She didn't choose it. It just happened. Like, this is life. And so I think that, and this is where that whole, when parents feel like they're between a rock and a hard place and that people are judging them, then they get mad. They get ragey.
Yeah.
And they quit and they go do other things.
Tough.
And either they leave the workplace entirely and they're like, screw VetNet, I'm not doing this bullshit anymore. Or they're like, screw all of these crappy bosses. I'm going to be my own boss. And so, I think you do need to really, as a single parent, there's always 2 parts, right? You have to have, actively build up yourself so that you can be the strongest version of you that you can. And that's probably going to mean that you need a therapist. And it's probably going to mean that you need some really good friends. And then you also need to look outside the box and figure out what's going to work for you. If you work in a really rigid workplace, you may need to change jobs. That's real. And there are certain companies and certain large multi-practice groups that are actively recruiting single moms. And they're doing it by offering things like flexibility and childcare. And so, go into that with your eyes open. I'm not saying you should go work for one of those companies. I'm saying that, what you're doing right now literally just may not work. Now, the particular person that I worked with as my first client, she works in ER medicine, which has really flexible hours. And so she could work her schedule to fit more with what she wanted based upon her childcare. And with a really young child, she preferred to have like weird kind of overnighty kind of shifts because she's like, I'm not sleeping anyway. May as well work. And then her mom was able to do some of that overnight care. But as her child's gotten older, she would like to see her during waking hours. Funny thing about that. And so she has shifted her work to be more during the daytime, but she still has a compressed schedule. So she has longer days off, and it means her mom has longer days off. And so they have traded back and forth these childcare responsibilities because she could do that. And that is a great example of what you can do with the house call practice. You can be like, I will only work between the hours that the daycare is open. I will only work 3 days a week when the nanny is available. I will only work on weekends. You can shift that to being what works for your childcare specific needs. Because frankly, the childcare
Men.
piece is going to be the hardest.
Amen. And cheers to that. Well said. That's the part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm so full and just so inspired speaking with you, and the amount of like compassion and skill and knowledge that you have around all of this material is really mind blowing to me. And I mean, you showed up with like statistics and publications. Like, damn, girl. Oh, I'm just so honored to have you on the show. And I know that everyone who's listening is going to get an insane amount of value for listening to these episodes. And before we wrap up everything, I just wanted to ask you one more question. Is there anything else that you'd like? Well, two questions. Okay. We'll put them in one. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about you, about resources you provide, anything else about veterinary medicine that you'd like to share? And since we're in the house call Vet Cafe, do you have a favorite beverage that we can toast to?
Absolutely. So I have a Facebook group, and that one is open to anyone who, I mean, I guess it's technically open to anybody. I don't really have like restrictions on it, except that you do need to be in the veterinary profession to be in that group. And I specifically ask where you go to vet school. And I believe I have one technician who I gave permission to be in that group. And I potentially would be open to having other techs in the group, but because it's a Q&A group, so there's not a lot of social interaction.
Right.
Yeah. But it is specific to veterinarians. I give very like medicalized specific information. It is not for the general public. They would not really enjoy that content. But it is a doula Q&A. And for the most part, what I'm doing is I'm reviewing literature. I'm pulling resources for people based upon specific questions that they send me, either through DM or within the group, or sometimes they ask like in the big DV Moms group and I answer in the Q&A group. But I put up a video every week or so answering people's questions. And that is a really great resource. I think I have 30 videos up right now of various questions people have asked. And then I have my big postpartum course. So that is I guess it's sort of like my flagship course, sort of. It's the first one I put out. I didn't really intend for it to be the flagship course, but that's what it's turned into. And it's literally a 12 module series of videos and downloadable resources and checklists and all links to stuff that is preparing for your postpartum as a veterinarian. Like it's pretty specific to veterinary medicine. So I don't talk about things you already know. Like I don't spend a whole lot of time on anatomy and physiology. Instead, I talk about here's things you didn't know about the way your brain remodels during postpartum, how this affects your mood. And then really awkward things like how do you deal with all of the things happening between your legs postpartum that no one talks about because no one wants to talk about adult diapers. Um, and then I also talk about the emotional part. I talk about the emotional part a lot because I feel like no one talks about the emotional part. So that's my big course. So you can learn about all the things you need to know, both practical and sort of like things you didn't even need, like things you didn't know you didn't know in that course. And then I have freebies on my website. I have a NICU guide freebie, which I would say is pretty unique. I've never seen anything like it. And it's basically taking a infant development approach to how to support your newborn in the NICU because I was just appalled with the poor quality information that was out there in the NICU space when we were there. So I wrote my own. And then I have a sleep course. That one is free. It's a 70-minute class on how to get enough sleep with a newborn. And then I have my miniature postpartum planner guide, which is like a little condensed version of my course, like a little mini version. So those are the resources I have on my website, veterinariandoula.com. And then reflections on the profession. So right now, as I mentioned to Eve, at a conference, that's all vets who are moms. And I didn't know that I needed this. I think that we want to be inclusive and that's a good thing to be inclusive. And we want to make sure that we are allowing space for everyone to bring them whole selves and but we don't all have to be the same. But I think that sometimes we need to be in spaces where we can just let it all down and like just not have to work quite so hard on the emotional intelligence piece all the time. Because as business owners and as clinicians who work with clients and as moms, we're kind of like holding everyone else's emotional baggage all the time. And it sure is nice to sometimes not have to do that. And so I guess what I'm saying here is that like have a safe space for yourself. You got to figure out what that looks like in your life, but make that safe space for yourself so that you're not always holding everyone else's needs, that sometimes you can put it down and let other people hold you. Yeah. Yeah. It's important. And I think we forget that.
That's beautiful. I couldn't agree with that more. I think that community and allowing yourself to be held, whether you're a mom and a vet or whether you're just a vet, or whether you're a vet and an entrepreneur, and finding places that like meet you exactly at the intersection of where you are and who you are and the struggles and challenges that you face that are pretty unique. Like if you're a vet with any other intersection, it's already very unique, right? And so as a part of my program, we have our monthly group coaching calls, and those have gotten more and more elaborate over time. And they're really beautiful. It's really beautiful to see people kind of share their struggles and their wins, but also be held by the community and know they're not alone. And we'll actually be having Emily speak to our group, and I believe it's next month or in a few weeks. I can't remember. I'll have to check my schedule. But our lucky 3 weeks, yay! Our amazing House Call Vet Academy participants will have the honor of having a group, like a special like group session where they get to have Emily all to themselves and be together as the intersection of moms, house call vets, and veterinarians and everything else that they are, the whole self. And so I also wanted to give credit where credit is due. I happen to know Emily is at the Veterinary Moms Encouragement Conference held by Dr. Julie Busby. I'm a huge fan of her, and I know her conferences are really, really meaningful to a lot of moms. And if you're there right now, I know that this episode is going to come out after it's done, but for anyone who's there or who was there, my heart is with you, and I hope you have the most amazing, nourishing time. And on that note, what is your favorite beverage?
Yeah. Okay. So I have 2 favorite beverages, and I always like never know which one I want on any given day. It depends on how bad the day's been. The first one is an Arizona green tea. I'm such a stereotype. That is my drink of choice. But you know how I got there? Because that's kind of a funny story. I decided about 8 years ago now that I would no longer drink things out of plastic bottles. I was just like, I cannot live with myself for using disposable plastic bottles. I am not doing it ever again.
For you.
And so I would walk into a gas station and be like, all right, what do we got that's not in a plastic bottle? And at one point I could get Snapple, but now Snapple has changed and they are in plastic bottles and I cannot have Snapple anymore. So now it is the things in cans, which Arizona green tea is my favorite of the things in the cans that I can consistently get at a gas station. So that's the first one. And then the second one, even more stereotypical, is my Starbucks white chocolate mocha with soy milk. And it's my go-to, preferably in a grande. Yum.
Love it. Oh my gosh.
You can probably guess my age just by my drink choices.
Oh my God. Yes. It's on the 80s.
83. Yes.
All right. Yep. Oh, amazing. This conversation was so juicy and so nourishing and so fulfilling. And I'm just feeling very, very grateful for our conversation together. And I guess I also wanted to say that if you're not a parent or not even considering being a parent, like the gems in this conversation are just like applicable to life. Like you said in the beginning and coming full circle, it's like a doula of everything. Like they're interrelated, life and death and the whole circle and everything in between. And so I hope you guys got as much out of this conversation and inspiration as I did. And thank you again for being with me, Dr. Emily.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the House Call Vet Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode, then hit the subscribe or follow button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never have to miss an episode. This podcast is made specifically for you, so don't be shy if you'd like to reach out and let me know your thoughts on this episode. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as The House Call Vet Academy, where I also share more valuable content. If you're interested in learning more about consulting for house call vets or the House Call Vet Academy online course and community, please click on the link in the show notes. Have an amazing rest of your day, and I can't wait for you to join us for our next episode of the House Call Vet Cafe.